lost you there for a while. Oh, there we are. Okay, I can't hear you, Elisa. I gotta unmute you.
I'm afraid this is gonna happen again. So I'm just gonna, I'm broadcasting now, so people can come in.
Welcome everybody. Have we got people signing up? Signing in?
Are people here?
Yeah, are they here?
Yeah, we have 5 people so far. Oh, okay. Hi everybody. Okay.
Hello. We're just getting set up. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Okay, Lori, I'm just gonna make you the host, okay?
But do I have to let people in or will they just come in?
They're already coming in, yeah. Yeah, it's fine.
And I don't have to do anything to let people in?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm the host. Here we are. And you can hear, I'm the host now. And you can hear, well, you could hear a few seconds ago, the pots and pans banging in my neighborhood here in Vancouver because it is 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And so we'll be starting any minute, but welcome, 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 welcome. And what I'd like people to do, oh, can I see people as they come in? Anyway, we decided that in terms of housekeeping, it's best to join in and then turn off your video because it helps with the bandwidth. And so if you can do that and keep muted until near the end of the talk when I'm gonna ask for questions and we can have a discussion, then we can open up the videos again and hopefully everything will be tickety-boo, tickety-boo, tickety-boo. So I hope you all had a good day today. And oh, I already got a message from Monique. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, I tried a little different type of a hairdo today. The glamour, it's all about the glamour. Awesome. And today I had a really nice walk and I have been walking down the alleys in my neighborhood and discovering different plants and different kinds of things that I've observed along the way. And I walked down to my community garden and I happened to run into a friend who actually lives way over in UBC, and she just happened to be having a meeting on the bench right beside my community garden, and we haven't seen each other for months, and so it was really nice to run into my friend Erin, and that was a really nice thing. So this is October, but I'm actually going to use it as Walktober and walking in the neighborhood and really doing those fall observations of what's happening right now. And I kind of picked a theme for my fall walk today, and it was nectar. And I wanted to see if I could see some nectar plants on my walk. So this morning in my garden, I actually saw a hummingbird in my lavender, which is rare. I rarely see, I don't actually think I've seen a hummingbird in lavender before because it's not one of their preferred plants, but obviously it's slim pickings. So she was in my lavender, and then she went over to I have a few sweet peas that are still blooming in my backyard. So she went into the sweet peas, and then a big Vosnezensky queen came and also foraged in the same blossom. So I don't know how much nectar was left after the hummingbird had been there. And so then I walked down looking for nectar plants all the way down the alleys, and got to the community garden. And as I was talking to Erin, I actually saw a leafcutter bee in the dahlias that we were looking at. And I haven't seen a leafcutter bee for ages. And so I was so happy to see one. And then we saw another Vosnezensky queen in the dahlias. So there's obviously some nectar in those dahlias. Just gonna quit my email. All right. So I think it's good for us to start now. I'd like to get started. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone here. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm Lori Weidenhammer, and I'd like to welcome you to our final talk in this series called The Gardens of Our Lives. Our residency, Victory Gardens of Diversity at Terra Nova, is coming to an end. And this talk is a culmination of discussions that I've had with my collaborators and with other people. since the start of the residency. So I will open it up to questions at the end, and I'm really excited to having a discussion, and I'm hoping some of my colleagues will join me as well and talk about some of the things that I'm raising today. I live in Vancouver on the north side of the Fraser River, and I'd like to acknowledge my gratitude for having the privilege to be here on the unceded ancestral territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And as our residency is based on the south side of the Fraser River, I'd also like to acknowledge our gratitude to the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Coquitlam nations. Long before the original Victory Gardens, the Coast Salish, who have lived here for thousands of years, were the first gardeners. From camas beds to clam beds and many, many other plants such as evergreen huckleberries, Saskatoon berries, and wild berries, these gardeners were here long before us. And surely a discussion about kinder gardens needs to address giving the land and its bounty back to the first caretakers and healing the damage we have done to the earth and to its first gardeners. My name is Weidenhammer, good German name, and I'm a settler of German, English, Scottish, and Irish descent. I was born on Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan, which is the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I grew up in a tiny hamlet called Cactus Lake, Saskatchewan, which was bordered by wheat fields, my mom's garden, natural prairie, and pasture. I had a free-range childhood and spent many hours daydreaming on the prairie with meadowlarks and bumblebees. So now I'm going to start my PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. Let's see. Slideshow. There we go. Share. There we go. That looks better. Okay, here we are. Kinder gardens. It's not liking that, so click. There we go. So this is actually my mom and her sister, and they are in Bounty, Saskatchewan, where my mom grew up, which is near Outlook, Saskatchewan. This is in the 1940s, and my grandfather was a farmer, and he grew grain crops. And this is a typical bunch of potatoes that people grew during wartime and lived on it. And my mom and my father both grew up during the Depression in their childhood and then wartime. And so I actually have food insecurity in my history, as many of us do. And in fact, my dad's mother, Grandma May, she never threw anything away in her fridge. And every once in a while, my mom would have to go out and do an emergency cleaning while my grandma was out somewhere else, because a lot of the food was moldy and just way past its sell-by good to eat date. And so my grandmother obviously had this Depression era kind of mentality that was really deep down inside. And I also have that too. I get panicky if there's not enough food in the pantry, and I have that in my background, and it's in my genes. And so that's one of the reasons that I love gardening, is because it helps with that feeling of food insecurity and growing plenty to eat. And the fact that the place where my mom came from is called Bounty, I thought was really interesting. And in fact, a weird thing is that at the time when they were naming the towns, it was supposed to be called Botany because there were prairie lilies growing around the hamlet site. But someone just decided to change it to Bounty because they thought it was more accessible or something. And before that, even where I lived in Cactus Lake in the 20s, my grandparents grew up with people who gardened. Everybody had a garden. Everybody knew how to grow things, how to cook things, and it was just a part of everyone's life. And so we've become further and further removed from that kind of lifestyle. And I'm always interested in getting back to that connection to growing food. My great-grandpa, Dean, was also a cowboy. So I also have that history of, he was really good with horses. And my dad said he used to sleep underneath his horse out in the open prairie. And, but he was also obviously used his horses to break the land and to grow food crops. And he used his horses also to dig wells on the prairie, which was another gig that he had to make extra money. And so this is the cactus, the famous cactus of Cactus Lake. And it grew all around the town site where I lived. And it was one of the beautiful native plants that lived where I grew up. And as I was so lucky to be around native plants and to have parents who were very, who educated me and who really appreciated native plants, I was able to go to take a bee course with Lincoln Best in Kamloops a few years ago. And we went out into this meadow, and there was just this incredible biodiversity of flowers and bees and everything else. It was one of those moments when I was really profoundly happy. And I just thought, this is where I want to be. I want to be back in the meadow with all that beauty and all that biodiversity. And this is a slide I've shown for many years in my garden talks. This is again Cactus Lake. And on the front of the photo, you see native prairie. It's actually pasture because it is lightly grazed. In the back is a canola field. And this particular farmer, my dad always begged him not to plow up the native prairie to farm and to get the insurance if the crop failed. And so I think that this shows you such a striking difference between the way we practice monoculture and the wildness that we actually have on our grasslands that's rapidly disappearing, a lot of it because of agriculture. I went to a show called Rewilding Vancouver at the Vancouver Museum, and they had this display on a lot of creatures that had become extinct or almost, we'd lost a lot of them in recent years. And one of them was the Western Bumblebee, which used to be the most common bee in Western North America, or Western Canada at least. And now it's really difficult to find in some places. And as I walked outside the gallery, I was really sad because I thought, I don't want to live in a future where the only way that we see bees is to have an example of a specimen in a vitrine. And there it is, the beautiful Western Bumblebee, Bombus occidentalis. And so I really am on a mission. I'm a bee evangelist to talk to people about how we can make our world better for bees and other creatures. And I really do have an affinity for bees and also wildflowers. It was actually wildflowers that got me interested in bees because I grew up with loving wildflowers so much. And when I learned about the connection to the native bees, then I also fell in love with the native bees. The power of a garden lies in its very smallest inhabitants, not just bees, but also even just the little tiny creatures that live in the soil are really important to biodiversity. And that's one of the big principles that I believe in and that the scientists tell us. Come on. Oh, there we go. Oh, I see what's going on. So here is a big fat boy bumblebee sipping on that nectar, and I wanted to make sure that I had lots of beautiful bees in my presentation just to have the feeling of what I'm going for here and to spur me on to my mission and my talking about my ideals. When you love someone, you want to take care of that person as you would take care of yourself. That's the relationship each of us can have with the earth. That's Thich Nhat Hanh. And I think that that's the thing, is that when you are in love with bees and plants and soil, then it is like being in love with another person. And that caring, nurturing attitude is something that I certainly am inspired by in my own life, and that I want to share with other people, all ages, from really young people to seniors. And we need to garden for biodiversity, beauty, and resilience. This is a little beautiful frog. I was taking pictures in the wet meadow at Saanich Native Plants on Vancouver Island, and this little frog popped up on a leaf, and I was just so full of joy to see it. And they've actually made a beautiful habitat there for amphibians, native amphibians, and it's just a wonderful place to be. And so I wish there were more native plant nurseries that we had, so that we had more accessibility to native plants, and so that they also would help us to heal the land. So here's a really cool project, and it's a lovely idea. People have actually just left some little garden plots for people to help themselves. And I'll show you a picture of what it looks like. It's a bag, and it's filled with earth, and then there's squash growing in it, tomatoes, herbs, all kinds of things. This is in just in East Vancouver. It's near the Western Front, down the hill from where I am. And it's interesting, the placement of it. It's actually really close to the lineup where people go to get food from the food bank at number 1 Kingsway. And so this is a really lovely project. It seems to be completely anonymous. And I think we should do more of this. We should copy this. This is exactly the kind of thing that we should be having on every street. And there we have some strawberries, some nasturtiums, herbs in these bags, and they've just put them all on the street and basically just said, help yourself. It's just a lovely idea. And it is really easy to grow beautiful native plants in small containers as well. People ask me often what to grow in small containers, and this is at Saanich Native Plants again. They put these beautiful blue violets in these half barrels. And so half barrels, small gardens are really interesting things and quick ways of adding food and native plants to the environment. So I like this idea. We could pool resources to sew bags. The bags, I think, are made out of a plastic fabric, but I think it would be interesting to use things like wool or burlap that are not plastic. We could find suitable locations. We could order soil, fill it up, and then just take this into the community. And each group that has a leader takes some and plants them and puts them around even in the back alleys. And then in the fall, they get cleaned up and put into a compost site. I think it would be a really easy thing to duplicate. There's another beautiful bee. Hello. Okay, and then I was thinking about seniors and how a lot of times seniors who have gardened, they give up gardening because it's more difficult for them. Well, let's make it easy for them. Give each senior one or more of these bucket planters for them to use in their balcony or outside their front door. And then they have maybe a buddy that helps them with the checkup on the plant, and then the senior. And it could be a way of creating relationships, intergenerational relationships. There's a cute bee. So this is where I get into the kind of more visioning. And I'm going to throw out some ideas, and I want at the end for us to talk about them, and I hope they inspire you. So imagine if we use the food and medicine already within our reach. I've been walking all over Vancouver in the recent months, and I see a lot of food that's there, but the idea is, how do we process it? How do we share it? How do we make it accessible to other people? And so, for instance, in our neighborhood, there's a lot of rose hips that have a lot of vitamin C, and they're really great. So let's work together to find ways of processing it and sharing it and helping other people harvest them. There's a lot of haw fruit in our neighborhood as well, and they're incredibly nutritious. And I actually don't use them because first of all, there's a little bit of embarrassment. Like, I don't want to go to just like start picking haws off, and people are going, what are you doing? And I'd say, I don't know. Like, I think part of it is just sharing the knowledge. But there is actually a lot of food in our city already that we could use. Imagine if we honored Indigenous plant culture, elders, and teachers. This is a really basic part of creating kinder gardens. And at the Beatty Biodiversity Museum, they have these wonderful ethnobotanical signs that talk about the plants that they have. And this one's about the Makah people maintaining evergreen huckleberry bushes by burning and pruning them, which made them have more flowers, which was great for bees, and then have more berries, which was also great for the bears and for humans that consumed them. So this kind of knowledge needs to be really put into our education system. And there's been a really great project that I wanted to talk about. And it's called, it was an Indigenous Foodscapes project in elementary schools in the unceded territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the project set out to bring native plants and traditional knowledge into the minds, hearts, and bellies of children and youth, which is absolutely fantastic. 9 schools in the Vancouver School Board received grants to build Indigenous foodscapes right on the school grounds, and to integrate that foodscape into the curriculum through workshops, field trips, and other activities. And I met some people, and I've worked with Lori Snyder, of course, who's one of our collaborators who was part of this project, and Samantha Gambling was also the animator for this project. They worked with Robert Clifton, an Indigenous education consultant. Chas Descharlet, Trudy Harris, and Amanda White also contributed to this wonderful project where they had children working with native plants on school grounds. And those gardens are there now, and they will remain part of their outdoor classrooms. I think this is such a great project. Let's support this project in the infrastructure of it, and let's have this in every school in Canada. I mean, it just makes sense. I think it's awesome. Another project that is here that's been fantastic is the Resurfacing Histories project. And I've got to find my notes on that right here. And that was through Mount Pleasant. That's through Mount Pleasant Neighborhood House. It's still actually going on, and it focuses on developing a community process for promoting understanding of the land and land-based teachings. And it was specifically for the elders, First Nations elders in the community here, but it was open to anyone who wanted to come. And I came and witnessed and partook of many of the events. And it's been a fantastic program to help people learn plant medicine. And this project was managed by Jolene Andrew, who's a Gitxsan Wet'suwet'en, and she's worked with the urban Indigenous community in the Lower Mainland for 18 years. So these are the people, these are the programs that we really need to put money behind and support system and infrastructure in order to make our cities and our whole culture more plant knowledgeable. Imagine if we gave land back one food corridor at a time. So we need Indigenous gardens in schools, community centers, all over the place. And we need to create food and water security for First Nations. That needs to be a top priority. And we can do that one small garden at a time. So what's happening in Vancouver is people have really been enriching their boulevards with gardens and with cultural projects. And it used to actually be illegal to garden on your boulevard, which is pretty ridiculous, but people just started doing it, and this whole movement started, and it's actually become this fantastic part of Vancouver. There is a program called Green Streets that helps to oversee some of these gardens. But sometimes people just do their own thing. And I love these little libraries that pop up. And this little library popped up on a boulevard. And it's actually the same color as the house that's beside it, which is very charming. But what I love is this We Free seed box in Victoria. in the James Bay, through the James Bay Neighborhood Association. So this was a way of getting seeds into the community and for people to actually bring the seeds in and exchange them in the library. And so they created these lovely seed packets that were interactive that people could use. It worked really well. I'm really inspired by this, and I'd love to do it in our neighborhood because I think it's a great project. And it's a great grassroots way of creating community and sharing seeds. And so there you have the finished packet and what it looks like. There's also another project through Cloudscape Comics, and they're actually have an artist residency, and they've created this insect library with this comic that's all about bees and how do you help bees. But I was thinking, well, why don't we have an insect library in every neighborhood? Like we could have a grasshopper library and a leafhopper library and, you know, syrphid fly library. I just love this idea of having all these different ways of communicating with people and creating art and putting out information into the community. And this is a view of some of the other projects that they've done with this Cloudscape Comics residency. Imagine healing the connection we've lost to plants, insects, and each other. And we've been talking about nature deficit disorder and this thing which people have been calling plant blindness, but we're finding another way of talking about that because that's an ableist expression. So I'm saying plant awareness deficit, insect awareness deficit. People aren't noticing insects, they're not noticing plants. And because we've become divorced and over years and generations from our farming or growing relatives, we need to bring this back into our culture. So we need to take children to the meadows, like the meadow that I grew up with in the meadow in Kamloops, but we also need to bring the meadows to the children. And so this is Memorial South Park, where they have created this pollinator meadow in one part of the park. And it is a beautiful way of actually having this little patch of wildscape meadow that children can experience and they can lose themselves in, just the same way I did when I was a child. I think it's fantastic. Imagine artists, oops, that one needs to go backwards. Imagine artists and scientists in residence in community gardens, parks, libraries, schools, school gardens, galleries, museums, community centers, all these. It doesn't have to even be artists and scientists. It can be plant people, healers, all these people that have relationships with the earth. We really need to have them as community builders working in all these public spaces outside. For instance, the EarthHand Gleaners here in Vancouver have been awesome to work with. I used to be a part of the means of production garden, which was growing artist materials to use in the garden. And the EarthHand Gleaners are doing this, and they're creating wonderful programming around plant-based knowledge and plant-based art. And for instance, they made these bee hotels where they actually made the string out of fibers, out of natural fibers that held these bundles of stems together that the bees and other insects can nest inside. And so they're actually artists in residence in a few parks in the city. And it's a fantastic way of having these kinds of socially engaged programs. Kinder Gardens means getting off our dependency on plastic. And I was talking about this with a friend today. There's a lot of plastic in gardening, in both the private and in gardening business. And my friend Andreas Carr once said, well, imagine if everything plastic had to be one color. And so I was thinking, oh, that's brilliant. Like, what color should it be? Well, what if everything plastic had to be bright neon orange? So it was a kind of a sign of failure that we hadn't actually used a better material. So that would mean that AstroTurf would have to be orange. So if you had an orange lawn, it wouldn't be something that you could get away with or that looked great. It would actually look really tacky. And so I just wanted to throw that out there to see what people thought about that. Imagine artists growing their arts and crafts materials. So this is Catherine Shapiro's garden. She's growing indigo, and you can watch her talk on her process. And it's been so inspiring to be her neighbor and collaborator, to see all the history that she has as a gardener and as a maker, and making this she has this incredible depth of knowledge with plants and what she does. And she has mentored so many people, and she is very generous with her knowledge. And so I've actually really benefited from that. And I love seeing other people benefit from her knowledge and her fantastic artwork. And so I'm hoping that we can get her work into some galleries so more people can see what she's doing. And another colleague, Jenn Pearson, made me really happy as part of this residency to actually be able to grow these Hopi sunflowers. And I grew some, I gave some to Catherine, and there were some at the farm. And every time I see them, they just fill me with such joy, and this idea that they feed the bees, but you can also make these incredible dyes and paints out of them. And black is a color actually that you don't find in natural dyes a lot. So it's one of the fun ones to play with. So as a part of our residency with Terra Nova, we were actually able during this pandemic to have this garden space, which was such a wonderful thing to have. And we grew these artist materials. And that was one of my favorite parts of the residency. And we also were able to work with the David Suzuki Butterfly Way project and have some of those plants integrated into this garden as well. So we were feeding the bees, feeding the butterflies, but also creating art materials and food materials to use in our workshops as well. So for instance, we grew marigolds, which we used to make paper and color the paper, and calendula, which we're using to make salves, which were for our workshop on Sunday. And that's one of the fantastic parts of the residency that I've been so excited about. And these are some of the plants such as ocean spray and sea thrift that were given to us by the David Suzuki Foundation. And so people could go to the garden and they could read about these plants and see the plants, even though we couldn't be there during the pandemic. We formed this kind of self-guided tour. There was also some of the native fruits that we had were Virginia strawberry and kinnikinnick. And then we grew things like ground cherries, and there were also potatoes in there that we're going to use for our workshops as well. Imagine sharing farms on every block. So what's fantastic about Terra Nova is it has the sharing farm and Richmond Food Security, which is making meals all the time, especially during the pandemic, for families who are food insecure. And the sharing farm gives a huge number of meals and food to the Richmond Food Bank, which is a fantastic thing and should be in every city. But imagine if you had a small sharing farm on every block. A lot of community gardens now, if there's extra produce, they put them on little shelves for people to help themselves. That's the kind of future that we really need to work towards. Imagine if every street was a green street. So I'm lucky I live in this street that has all these different projects for greening boulevards with flowers and replacing our invasive grass with pollinator plants and food plants. So this is one of my favorite. Again, it looks like a meadow. I can just look at this boulevard, and I want to meet this gardener someday because there's a lot of prairie sort of grassland plants in here, and it's these pale cone flowers are just so beautiful. The way that the petals just ruffle in the breeze, and it takes me back to a real prairie meadow. But it's the best thing that you can get in a city, and it's just such a lovely thing to have. Then we have the Green Streets program, which I said has been going for many years, and it's volunteer based. So you can sponsor and take over one of the street corners or one or more of the street corners. And they've really beautified the neighborhood, and they've made these fantastic pollinator corridors because they're now connecting all the way around the city. And my friend Tamara actually, she worked with the Green Streets program and the Butterfly Project, David Suzuki Butterfly Project, and created this pollinator garden just outside our door, basically. And it's been an example of how we can create these infrastructure projects, Green Streets, David Suzuki, and work together to make our habitat work. Imagine if every back alley was full of wildflowers. So I've been walking down back alleys because it's actually just less stressful than having to negotiate people all the time and step aside. And every once in a while I find where someone has extra soil and they've tossed some wildflower seeds, and it just really makes me happy to see that. And I hope it makes other people happy as well. I meet people who are like picking through the garbage and getting the glass and stuff, and get the bottles for the deposit and everything. And they actually basically live part of their lives in the alley. And so I was just thinking, well, why don't we make our alleys beautiful? Why don't we put food in our alleys as well? Because that would make it just an incredible greenway. And when I was walking down the alleys, I found this beautiful art installation on this fence and I met the gentleman who did it, and he made these stencils out of wood and then sandblasted them off. And he said on the other side, it's the opposite, so that the larger part of the fence is blasted, and then the stencils are not blasted. And he's actually got the Big Dipper there, and he's put stained glass in the knot holes. So these are ways that we could take these alleys, which are the kind of things that are the liminal spaces, the spaces that we don't want to see, and actually make them really beautiful and desirable. Imagine linear meadows in parks and cemeteries. So I spend a lot of time at Mountainview Cemetery because it's a really peaceful, beautiful place, and there's a lot of good pollinator plants there. And Heather, who's the main gardener there, she's just a fantastic person, and she really loves the bees and the butterflies and the birds. And so she's been creating these beautiful linear meadows in the cemetery, and it's worked out just incredibly well. And so as part of the project, they planted a bunch of tulips that were given to us by the Dutch in appreciation for service in World War II. And then when the tulips are done, she actually spread some pollinator seeds in there, and they germinated and sprouted in the late summer and in the fall, and provided even more habitat, which is really beautiful. And so what she's done is put up signage to talk about, you're allowed to walk your dogs in the cemetery, but to be respectful to the plants and to the graves. So this is the Mountainview Cemetery, where Vancouver remembers. There's actually an artist in residence, and they do have events there at All Souls. And so there is an artist connection to the graveyard as well, which is just fantastic. And the garden is part of that as well. So here you are, you can see the linear meadow going down the side by the graves. And it's coming to be fall, so the maple leaves are just beautiful. And here's an example of putting some native plants like Fleabane and Pearly Everlasting and Nodding Onion around this particular grave site, which makes it just absolutely beautiful. And there's actually a lot of biodiversity in that little patch. And there's a close-up of Skipper on the Fleabane. And there were also birds nesting in the meadows, little savanna sparrows nesting in the meadows this year as well. This is one of my favorite parts, and basically it's some native perennials that just come back year after year after year, like that Monarda and the Echinacea and the Coreopsis. There's lupins in there as well, and asters. And this is actually a great example of something that really seems to work well, and it's not a high maintenance meadow at all, but it's a fantastic pollinator habit, and it's just a really beautiful thing to have in our cities. Imagine re-greening every business. So a lot of businesses actually take responsibility for their boulevards and for gardening their boulevards. And this Federal Store Cafe has a beautiful pollinator garden all around it. And you can't see it, but there's actually in behind the flowers there, they've got a patio, and you can sit outside on the patio beside these flowers. And so imagine if every business took that responsibility and made this beautiful pollinator garden. Souk Harbor House on the island is an example of or was an example of a business that had this gorgeous garden where they grew a lot of their food. They have this beautiful camas here, which is a native edible plant. And they landscaped their gardens with these beautiful native plants, and they had all these edible plants, and they grew them for their kitchen. So I wish that there were more businesses that could do that. I love the way that they actually integrated the violets right into this staircase here. And speaking of camas, I think that it's an example of a native plant that I would love to see. Although it's more of a Vancouver Island plant, it actually does grow very well in other parts and in urban situations like Vancouver. And I was able to see a bunch of it on Galiano Island in this beautiful Anthophora, a long-tongued diggerbee, getting in there and drinking the nectar. And so it's a way, again, of bringing the meadows to the children. If the children can't go to the meadow, bring the meadow to the children and plant those beautiful camas flowers. And there's the beautiful little long-tongued bee. What a sweetheart. So another great project in my neighborhood is Project Green Block, which was a way of getting families together to build pollinator gardens on their front lawns and in the boulevards and have little signs that you'll see. And the other day I noticed that this one actually had some fireweed in it. And so this eastern bumblebee was drinking up the nectar in there. And so this is a quote by David Suzuki: "Bees are most important pollinators, love to live in urban settings where there are short flight paths and a variety of different plants and flowers. Bees are more likely to thrive in a backyard, community patio, or patio garden and on mixed farms than on acres devoted to a single crop. Unfortunately, bee species are declining mainly because of habitat loss." So David Suzuki is talking about biodiversity. And where there is biodiversity, there are going to be better environments for bees. Although Dr. Elizabeth Alley from SFU has talked about how in the cities we're more likely to see generalist species, or the squirrel species of bees, not the specialist species that we see in real wild ecosystems. So we have to create biodiversity where there isn't any, but we also do need to protect those wild ecosystems. And here's a beautiful example of a bench that's also a garden, and so people in the community can sit there and pick a few leaves of kale, have a snack, have a little socially distanced picnic, and this is in my neighborhood. I love it. This sweet garden made for you and me is also for our friend, the honeybee. Before the winter, she works hard to get ahead, so please do not disturb this planter bed. So sweet, and there's lots of mint in there, which is blooming right now. And then this is when this garden had a lot of chives in it and Russian sage. And so you can actually pack a lot into these little kind of octagonal gardens. So this was a pollinator pathway. And one of the important things that I'll be talking about in this is that we do need pathways. So there needs to be connectivity between bee gardens. And the Environmental Youth Alliance did a great project where they found a hotspot, pollinator hotspot, Van Dusen Gardens, Oak Meadows Park, and then Queen Elizabeth. And they wanted to grow gardens along the way that linked those hotspots, because what's happening in our city is that as more and more smaller gardens get developed into condos, we're losing that connectivity. And so we need to keep our boulevards and our back alleys full of plants. Oops, I'll go back. I just wanted to give credit. This was funded by Evergreen, City of Vancouver, David Suzuki Foundation, all these partners. And this is another garden that I actually love in my neighborhood. It's on the green block, and to me it's a real victory garden for bees. She's got perennials all the way around it, and then she's got these raised beds in the middle where you can see the sunflowers growing. She's got tomatoes in there, and sure, it gets unruly at this time of the year, but look at it, it's so gorgeous. And what she's done is she's made a simple little string fence around there, and it's kept it, contained. This is an example of this beautiful aesthetic. It's a beautiful, wild, some people would see it as messy aesthetic, but this is exactly the kind of thing that we need in our neighborhood. Again, it's this meadow kind of aesthetic. Imagine meadows on every front yard and boulevard. This is what that prairie meadow that I showed you before looks like in the fall. There's a lot of purple, there's a lot of asters in there, and it's just, I think the seed heads are beautiful too, and the grass that's in there is lovely. So imagine that on every yard and every boulevard. That would be awesome. And there we would have more bees, like this beautiful leafcutter bee. If half the American lawns were replaced with native plants, we would create the equivalent of a 20 million acre national park, 9 times bigger than Yellowstone, 100 times bigger than Shenandoah National Park. That's Doug telling me. You know, lawns take up a lot of space. So when you add them all up, you can create this positive synergy, this connectivity. But in Vancouver, what's happening, laneway housing, condos are taking those green spaces away and eroding them. So we're struggling to keep up. We need to create policies that protect the green spaces. Because we need spaces for these little ground nesting bees. And in cities, we put pavement down, we put concrete down, we put astroturf down, we put lawns down, and these guys, these gals can't get down into the soil. So we need to fix that. Imagine if people realize the concept of lawn is promoted by the garden industry to sell us pesticides, herbicides, leaf blowers, lawn blowers, sod, astroturf, and unnecessary labor costs. The yards today were full of gardeners making noise, leaf blowers, cutting, blowing, pruning, all the noise. And a lot of it's all about the lawn. We got to forget about the lawn. The lawn needs to go the way of the dodo. We need more of this. And this. And this. And this actually is one of my favorite boulevards of Green Street by the local elementary school. And there's this cat mint there, which is why I took the picture with the cat. It's Nepeta, and the bees go nuts over that, and it blooms and blooms and blooms. The snowberry is there also, which also attracts bees, and yarrow, and it's just a fantastic design. And there's our little leaf cutter on the yarrow. And then this I just saw the other day, a little pollinator garden in a boulevard. And the story is that it's created by a grade 6 student who just read up on pollinators and decided to create their own little garden. And, you know, this is the kind of thing that warms my heart. Grassroots, getting it out there, signage, it's all there. So this is where I want to get into more of the native landscaping, and this is a Oregon grape that our neighbor Celia planted on her boulevard. And what was great about this is that there's a power pole there that was starting to rot, and the mason bees moved into the holes in the power pole, and they go right from their nest holes to the Mahonia to get the pollen. And so that's an example of how there's this synergy of using the landscaping to create better habitat. And there's your mason bee on the beautiful Mahonia flower. And imagine wildscaping instead of landscaping. So there's a lot of native plants that could be used instead of the exotics that are sequestering carbon but not doing a heck of a lot else. And so we need to rethink what we use to make our hedges. And this is at a bus stop on the Arbutus corridor, this lovely Canada goldenrod. This is what our bus stop should look like. This is what our green corridor should look like. Farmers on 57th is a good example of a great project where they've actually just taken up the lawns, all the lawns, and converted them into gardens for vegetables and flowers. It's a true victory garden concept, and they have CSAs for the flowers and for the vegetables, and it's just a fantastic project in Vancouver. This was that bus stop that I showed you before with the goldenrod, when someone who didn't understand the importance of goldenrod just cut it all down. So education is a big part of this, educating all the staff. I talked with one of the gardeners, the city gardeners in the parks who shall remain nameless, and I talked about maybe adding some nodding onions to the rose beds. And he said, but they're invasive, aren't they? And I said, no. No, there's nothing invasive about nodding onions. And so someone who's been gardening professionally for many, many years, sometimes they don't have access to that knowledge. And so we've got to start over. We've got to give people the knowledge to be able to use native plants. Imagine edible landscaping. I mean, look at this. I love this, having the kale instead of the horrible yew hedge or whatever that is, and the squash. And it looks beautiful. It's just so gorgeous. It's beautifully done. Imagine teaching love and appreciation of insects instead of fear. I was really pissed off about the whole murder hornet thing because it just gets people afraid of insects again. We really need to go back to teaching children not to be fearful of insects and to actually learn how to be safe around them, just as you would teach them how to be safe crossing the street. But it needs to work this way. Wasps are indispensable. I love what Sprigley's Beescaping is saying is for every pest, there is generally a predator better than a pesticide, and it is usually or generally a wasp. That's the kind of integrated pest management that we need to be aware of and we need to teach other people. So again, I'm going to talk more about education. In Copenhagen, they were talking about making edible landscaping everywhere so that if you're going to the park and you're on the teeter-totter and your child gets hungry, oh, there's an apple tree, you can go pick the apple. Well, this is kind of the vision that we've had at Tupper, in the Tupper Greenway, which is between their field and their high school. There's a street there that has been changed into a garden because of a tragic incident that happened there. And it's been this project that's created this beautiful garden with edible landscaping. And what happens with the trees, of course, is that the apples fall off and they get rotten and so they fall on the ground. And so someone had stuck it on the fence as a kind of horrible installation. But when I was sitting on the bench and I was sort of moaning about how people don't know how to use the products that we have in the trees, this little preschool group came by and they, oh, am I on? I lost myself. Anyway, this little preschool group came by and they were looking for apples to pick for their snack. So they looked at all the trees and the trees with these apples were too high. So they went to one of the other trees and they found apples that they were able to use and to eat. So it is possible to use the apples, and it is possible with education and infrastructure to teach the importance and the beauty of harvesting food. Imagine networks of food gardens. In schools, churches, greenways, parks, microparks, golf courses. These need to be converted into food gardens, especially in the heart of the city. We just don't, golf is actually a very elitist sport and not everybody can access it. And so it would be much better to have accessible food gardens in those golf courses because it's just not a very good use of land space. And I love that there are farmers working in the city to convert lawns into farms. So City Beet is in my neighborhood and they are awesome, fantastic, growing these beautiful vegetable gardens right in the heart of the city. This is in Oak Meadows that I was talking about. It says my internet connection is unstable. I hope I'm still up. And they created this insect hotel out of a phone booth and then also had this beautiful pollinator garden beside it. And it worked out really well, and it needs to be redone and regenerated, but it's a beautiful project. This is, again, a community center where, as an example of using camas in the land, using camas in the landscaping, so having that flower everywhere in the city in public spaces would be a sign of commitment to using native plants. Oh, now it's stuck. Okay. And then I wanted to show this slide. This is actually Spring Ridge Commons in Victoria. And this is a really interesting place because it's a permaculture garden that's been around for over 20 years. And they have all, it's kind of based on a kind of a European of the commons. And so in 1991, Jeff Johnson, together with a group of volunteers, started laying sheet mulch over the gravel in an unused former school bus lot. So they've really transformed this, and they have all kinds of edible plants, and it's full of native birds, hummingbirds, bees, and other insects. The common is intended to be a place where community and members can meet, engage, and grow on land held in common. And I love this idea. They actually have tea parties in the garden, which they call Bee in the Garden. And it was a weekly tradition that they used to do from 1:30 to 3:30 every Sunday. And there would be music, and they would pick herbs in the garden, and they would work on a collaborative mural and enjoy working in the garden. And that, to me, is the essence of community involvement. It's a fantastic idea. We should have one on every block, really. And another food garden that we have in Vancouver is the Norquay Food Commons. And it's a beautiful space. Again, it's just a city lot that's been converted into a food hub, a food forest. And it's the one place in Vancouver where I've actually seen a cuckoo bumblebee on the native Nootka rose. And here's Laurie Snyder at the Norquay Community Food Forest giving a talk about salves and using plants. And so this education point has been really used within this organization in this outdoor classroom / food forest. Oops. And so another place that I've been involved in that is working with food security and pollinators is the Riley Park Community Garden through Little Mountain Neighborhood House. We've been working with the David Suzuki Butterfly Way project and local volunteers, and we designed this garden with different aspects of it, one of which is this west beach, which is the driest part of the garden where we put our kind of beach plants. And it's attracted all kinds of cuckoo bees and biodiversity of bees, and bees I actually hadn't seen anywhere else in Vancouver. We have espaliered orchards with plants grown underneath for pollinators as well. And instead of having one person per community plot, we started with the idea that it would be a group of people working with one plot, which is still happening. But what we also found is that people wanted to just garden together with everyone and to learn together. And so the whole garden again is becoming more of a commons. There's the West Beach. We have a beautiful south pollinator border which faces the park. There's tons of pollinator action happening in there. Blueberry patch and caning berries. There's a lot of native plants, native food plants in the garden, which is fantastic. I've also worked at the Vancouver City Hall Community Garden and worked with them to create some bee habitat. There's already a lot of pollinator habitat there, but we wanted to talk about ground bees nesting and cavity nesting bees. And so we made these signs and bee houses. The city also bought some property to make a pop-up pollinator park. And it's got bee and bat housing, murals, perennials, seats and tables. And again, it's this beautiful idea of having green space in areas in the city, which is kind of a semi-industrial area, and making it into this greenway, this beautiful greenway. It's also hooked up to the Arbutus corridor, which again helps with that interconnectivity. Imagine native gardens at City Hall. So in Richmond, Elisa worked with this project where the city bought a whole bunch of these gorgeous native plants and made this pop-up park in the center with these plants, and then sold the plants at a very reduced price to people who wanted to add native plants to their gardens, which was a fantastic project. This should happen at every city hall. Imagine green transportation corridors. So we have this green transportation corridor, the Arbutus corridor, where there were some original Victory gardens and community gardens. And again, all through there, it's a fantastic corridor. It's a long corridor where people can travel, but also bees, birds, small mammals, and wildlife can travel up and down this corridor. And then Border Free Bees was another group that worked with a pollinator meadow along a route in Richmond. And another great thing was this beautiful project that has the signage and the education and the housing built right into it. And when I went to Corvallis to work, to study with Lincoln Best, they have these beautiful pollinator gardens right on campus. So students that are studying pollinators can see them working right outside the classroom. And this little petal cutter, instead of a leaf cutter, was taking the petals from the Clarkia and using them in her nest. And so there you can see her carrying her petal. And this is a log where she's been making her nest. You can see with the pink petal in the hole there. So this is part of the pollinator garden and the housing they have at Corvallis University. And another thing they had were these beautiful longhorn males sleeping on the flower heads in the garden. And when we came to class in the morning, they'd just be waking up, and they like to nest, they like to roost together to stay warm. And they're so adorable. Imagine if people understood the real cost and the real value of food. That's part of growing up with, growing your own food. You realize how hard it is to actually grow it and how much energy and resources go into the production, and they're not reflected in the price. And so we need to also talk about the environmental costs of conventional monoculture and the social value of sharing food and food values. We need to talk about respecting farmers and farm workers and paying them fair living wages. It's a very risky occupation. And I don't think a lot of people just don't appreciate that. We also have to talk about the true value of healthy soil. It's not just the vegetables and the products, but it's also what are the environmental costs of having healthy soil. So of course I grew up close to wheat fields, and the prairie was broken, which caused, a lot of problems. A lot of topsoil blew away. It's not a great way to produce food, but we keep doing it over and over and over again. That really needs to change. Growing up with my mom's garden was a great way for me to have insights into how food is produced. And my mom was a great gardener and was able to create a beautiful kind of regenerative garden. And there she is with her giant sunflowers. Imagine if we shared intergenerational food culture and agriculture. When I'm walking down the back alleys in Vancouver, I see all these gorgeous Asian gardens. Some are Chinese, Canadian, Korean, Japanese, and a lot of them have vines in them. And they're producing a lot of food in a very small space. So there actually is a lot of nutrition packed into these small gardens. And I'm very inspired by, it's aesthetically, it's very basic, but there's a lot of nutrition packed in there. And there's your chard growing basically right out of the asphalt. And people are really making do. And these vines are just growing out of these small plastic buckets and producing all this food. It's incredible. Hedgerows and eco-buffers. What if people realized that the value of edible hedgerows and eco-buffers was greater than that of the farmland they border? So this is something that a contentious idea I wanted to throw out there, is that when we are creating these hedgerows and pollinator gardens around monoculture, they actually become more valuable in a lot of ways than the farmland itself. And we need to invest in that. And we need to protect pollinator habitat and wildlife habitat around the agricultural systems. It's not just about the beauty, it's also about the health of the soil and the pollinators, which affects the health of the food that's grown there. And the biodiversity is reflected in that. And so here's my mom again on the prairie, and I've always grown up with this sort of juxtaposition of the native prairie and then this farmland that has had the soil just completely leached of all its nutrition. In cactus like. And as I was passing through the prairies, I'm always looking in the ditches. I'm a bit of a ditch hound. I like to see what's growing in the ditches. And I noticed that last year when we were passing through Alberta, through the Siksika Nation, there was so many wildflowers in the ditches. I was just, I wanted to get out and take pictures and look at what was growing in there. But anyway, we stopped at a gas station and I was just able to document this wild licorice and goldenrod just growing in the ditch. And it's just one of those things where you just think, this is what we need all across Canada. We need healthy wildflowers in our ditches, on our railway lines, or disused railway lines. We need these paths. And this is in Horseshoe Canyon. Again, this beautiful biodiversity. This needs to be protected at all costs. We can't plow any more of it up. We have to have a moratorium on plowing up any grassland, any natural prairie, and we have to protect all our wild habitats. We have to get smarter about the way we grow food. This was another meadow in Alberta that Lincoln took us to, and just the biodiversity in this tiny little patch of meadow was so profound. And I got really kind of cougar motherish around it, like it needs to be protected. No one should have to go near, no one should go near this part grassland. And the thing is, because anything that's flat, people want to plow up and they want to make into crops, but we really have to fight that. We saw these really cool bees who make these nests. It was just awesome. What if people aspired to be food and shelter secure rather than middle class? I hate the term middle class. Really don't like it because it smacks of entitlement. And what I really think people should aspire to is something more humble. It's just that we all are food and shelter secure and water secure, and that we share that with one another. I talked about this before. What if native plants were more accessible? We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed. Resistance and change often begins in art, and very often in our art, the art of words. It is possible. We do need to change. And so that Western bumblebee that I talked about, I've been chasing that bee all around British Columbia. We found one in Boston Bar in a motel in their garden, and I've seen them on Vancouver Island in a couple of places, and I'm just, it really makes me happy to see them and to think that they're still alive, and I really, really want us to protect those bees. And the painted ladies also are one of these butterflies that actually migrates all over the place and needs land to feed on. And recently, in recent years, there's been large numbers of them, and they've been really bountiful in North America. And so to me, that's also a sign of hope that the insects are still there, but we do need to protect them. We also need to have fun. It's a big part of it, big part of the culture. And I do have a lot of fun. And this is a book that I wrote about protecting bees, which I have put out to the world. So that's my presentation. I lost myself, so let's see if I can stop share screen. There we go. Oh, there I am. Okay. Okay, and one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to read a poem, because I've written a poem about this whole idea. And it's for a book that Lois Clausen and I are going to be working on, which I'm really excited about. And I'm just going to read it. I grew up on a flyway in Cactus Lake, Saskatchewan. Sandhill cranes, trumpeter swans, Canada geese, snow geese, all flying south for the winter. Landing in golden stubble fields to rest and refuel. The cranes look like deer when you catch them out of the corner of your eye, driving past them in the car, leaving behind cloudy trails of dust on gravel roads, traveling to music lessons, church, visits with family and friends, back and forth, even in blizzards. We had to move on those flat prairie roads towards something and then back home again. moving toward promises of ripe Saskatoon berries, mysterious muddy lakes and cool turquoise swimming pools, Sunday dinner with grandma, greasy chicken and chocolate roll filled with whipped dreams. We all need to move. We are needy for movement. As the toddler breaks free from its mother and then back clinging to her legs, testing the bonds, but also strengthening the means of escape. What moves me now? Why should I move? So there's a taste of a poem that I'm working on about this, and I'm going to be putting a book about that. And it's also going to talk about the painted lady butterfly and things that you can plant in your garden to help the butterflies. Awesome. So now I would love to see you if you'd like to be shown, and I'd love to talk to you about these ideas that I put out there. So you can unmute yourselves and chat with us. So Elisa, can I see you?
Lori, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't think that our participants can show themselves. It's one of the, it's part of the webinar.
Form, I see.
So,
okay.
So
maybe
participants, if you have questions, I wonder if we can use the chat box.
Oh, the question, you can use the chat box. Okay, we'll use the chat box. Sorry about that. Awesome. Yes, so please do type in a question or a comment if you'd like to say something. I'd love to hear from you. Elisa, do you have any questions?
Any last, I'm just so sad that we didn't get to do, I don't know, what would you say, half of the things that we thought that we would do for this residency at Terra Nova Park.
Right.
What were the things that you wish you had done, that you had a chance to do?
Well, I really missed working with the preschool,
Yeah.
That was a real sad thing because, even now I would love to go out into the garden with them and dig and harvest if there's any potatoes left, or harvest the ground cherries and look at the bees and butterflies that are out there right now. I would love to be out there with the preschool kids. I'm just like, oh, that was a tough one. And when we are doing our workshops with food, it would be like, I would love to be sitting beside someone that can help be chopping carrots next to me and just have that connection and to just, I just had tastes of it when we went out to the farm. And so, for instance, there's this one family that I met, and there was two fathers and their two young boys. And so we were talking, and I said, can I show you my garden? And so we went over and we talked about the garden and looked at the bees, and they were asking all these questions, which was awesome. And then the little boy said, where's your house? I said, I live in Vancouver. And then he said, where's your car?
That's great.
Which I just thought was so sweet. And just like things like that, I miss that human connection, and I miss the creativity of those kids and being able to work with them. And I miss working with the seniors and the stories that they have about their lives and their culture and things like that. Like we're going to be sharing recipes from our own culture. And so I want to say, well, what kind of pickles do you make? Like to be able to have that back and forth, and that human connection I've really missed that. And just to be able to go out there, and we started doing nature walks with people, which I love doing so much. And then to have that cut short was really sad. So I miss that. I miss all those connections. Yeah. Oh, here we have something. Oh, so there's from Erica. She and her neighbors are building some gardens in North Vancouver and would love me to visit. Awesome. Pollinator plants are definitely key in our garden and a bigger vision. I love your enthusiasm and everything you're imagining. Oh, thank you, Erica. That's awesome. And the David Suzuki Butterfly Project has actually been really amazing in terms of community building, especially during times of COVID. I've heard some amazing stories come out where neighbors who've said that if it wasn't for that project, they would have been super isolated. But because of the David Suzuki Butterfly Project, they've met people in their community and worked together to create these pollinator gardens. So it's been actually a fantastic pandemic project. And so I'm really grateful for being a part of that. And I think it's gonna do a lot of good things in our city. So I think we really need to keep on that. It's been really great.
Oh, I just figured out how to make people visible. Okay, so apologies, everybody.
Oh no, that's okay. Okay, now we can see you. So if you do want to,
this is much better. If you want to talk, please
yes,
unmute yourself.
Unmute and we'll see you. And you can use your
video. I think I got everybody.
Yay!
Olga, are you there? You've got a question.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, Olga.
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Yeah, so I guess as a little bit of background, oh wait, I'll see if I can turn on my video. No, I don't know how to do that. Cannot figure that out, so I'll just go on to the question. Yep. Yeah, so I started doing landscaping a few months ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's, I would say it's very much the traditional type of, like it's mostly for commercial properties or like residential properties with stratas, and I'm just curious about the maintenance aspect of things because that's what I'm doing nowadays. Yeah. And specifically, do you think that the types of gardens that you envision for the future, would they take more or less, or like how would you compare the type of maintenance that it would take as opposed to the types of like conventional landscaping?
That's a really good question. I think that there's a perception that these kinds of gardens take more maintenance, but lawns take a lot of maintenance. I mean, you know, the church across the street, they're forever hiring someone to cut their lawn shorter and shorter and shorter and rake off every leaf and like use a leaf blower to like blow off every speck of twig or anything like that. That takes a lot of maintenance. And so these other gardens actually, once they're established, don't take a lot of maintenance. And so that's the key. Sometimes it's that tricky part of getting the plants established. And that's why it's important. Like I always tell people, if you're buying native plants, buy them big. Because you don't, like I actually started with 2 small plants in my backyard that were just tiny, little tiny pots. One was a salmonberry and one was a blackcap raspberry. And now they take off half my garden. But that took years and years and years. So if you start with the big plants and that investment, it's much, much better. So it's just, and it's that initial investment that takes a lot more. And it usually just takes more knowledge. Like people, if the person knows the plant, then they know how to take care of the plant. But if the person doesn't understand the plant, then it's going to seem like it takes more maintenance because they don't know how to, you know, deal with it. So I think it's more a culture of care than an actual hours and things of care. So it's more a knowledge-based kind of care that needs to happen. But good question.
Well, thank you.
It's funny because I was going to tell the story. I was on Queen Elizabeth Park there, where they've actually made this meadow that's unmowed, and there's a path that goes through it. And there were 3 boys about 9 years old all walking through it, and one of them was bragging about how much money he would get paid to mow this meadow, because he was getting paid by his neighbors to mow their lawns. And so his friends are like, yeah, well. How much would you get paid to mow this? And he's like, oh, a couple thousand, yeah. Which was hilarious, but also sad. Like how sad that he would think about a lawn in terms of how much money he would get paid to mow it down, rather than the value of the actual meadow itself. So I thought that was kind of funny. But what I talked about the nodding onion, nodding onions are invasive. No. Sure, they spread, but that's what plants are supposed to do. You know, we're just so used to people dealing with these well-behaved cultivars that don't do anything. Well, they're not real plants. Plants, you know, they seed, they self-seed, they grow, they, you know, they flourish. That's what plants are supposed to do. So anyway.
Would you say there's also a certain amount of like letting go of control over exactly what a planting is going to look like?
Well, that's the thing, you know, sometimes you just got to let it find its own shape and not have this preconceived idea. Like Pete Oldolf is this gardener who's making these beautiful, you know, wild looking gardens that have this aesthetic where they go in drifts, and they have a more, it's more of a lacy aesthetic. I called it lacy as opposed to lazy. There's plants that blend into one another rather than having these clearly defined spots where they are, and these kinds of like, you know, like planting the Canadian flag with geraniums, red and white geraniums. It's not going to happen. Anyway, but good point. And good luck with your work.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to put in their 2 cents? Jen, let me hear from you. Did you find anything in the back alleys today?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi. Today, actually, I'm painting with all of the inks or colors that I've been working on, and I've just been doing that throughout this whole talk. And
oh, great!
Testing out all the colors, and yeah, finally just sitting down for a minute and using them.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think of you often when I'm going down the back alleys. And I know someday we're going to run into each other.
I know. I love your idea of just planting things through the alleys, and I love all those gardens that you're talking about with where they're just packed in with veggies and
yeah,
like all those ad hoc plots, and it's so amazing. Yeah.
It is. And you know, there's goji berries. I love how like there's this one spot where a neighbor has obviously shared cuttings from their goji berry, because then you'll be like, oh, that neighbor has goji berries, that neighbor has goji berries, and they've shared, it looks like they've shared their cuttings down the alley, and so you see them. Yeah. And yeah, I love the way or perennials, you see where, oh, so and so has that perennial and they've shared it with that person and they've shared it with that person, and so it does. And I love how people just stuff things that are troublesome in the back alley. And in my poem, I talk about this one place where the architecture is really, the house has steel and glass and bamboo and grass, and there's no flowers or anything like that. But in the back of the house, there's a goldenrod stand of goldenrod, which is all floofy and going to seed. And so it's this sort of contrast to that well-controlled garden. It's this messy, you know, flowing kind of thing that's happening in the back alley, which is actually more interesting than what's happening in the front. I mean, one of my friends or someone really brilliant said that, you know, you can have a garden that's like a mullet. So it's all business in the front, but the party's out in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, the party's in the alley. That's where it's happening.
That's the party I want to go to.
Yeah, I know. And, you know, that's where I found those walnuts, where it's in the back alley. I'm always looking at the ground. So I saw this squirrel eating that walnut, and I was like, what the heck is that? I could hear this crunch, 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 crunch. And I looked down and there was all these walnuts. And so walnuts are notorious for making this beautiful brown ink. And but yeah, and I even found in one of the alleys there was an abandoned giant baseball that was made for a lantern festival.
Oh my god.
Like, I wonder if Catherine could transform that into something else. Yeah. I better tell Catherine where it is. But yeah, I think, you know, finding these things in the alleys and using things that are basically considered valueless, again, is also a really interesting kind of idea.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of ad hoc gardens around with people just whatever pot or container they've got, putting that extra soil in and chucking it out there. And sometimes those are really interesting. And Lois and I actually did a project which was all about repurposing containers. And part of it was that she actually grew things in these boxes. I think that her computer came in the back alley, which was awesome. So you can put little art installations in the back alley, you know? Yeah.
Catherine looks like she's working away on something right now.
Oh, I'm sure she is. Oh, there we go. Awesome. What are you working on, Catherine? You need, yeah. Oh, there you are.
I'm peeling a piece of mallow for a Zoom basket class I'm taking.
Oh, cool.
So see this piece?
Yeah.
I'm actually shredding a good deal of it because I'm finding it tricky, but the pieces that are nice are really beautiful.
Oh, cool.
They're kind of shiny. You can't see it, but.
Yep. Awesome.
Lori, that was really so excellent. Like I can't even believe how many little gardens are out there and how you've managed to collect all those photos and and knowing about all those plants and all the creatures. It's pretty incredible. It's so wonderful. And like, maybe you need to do this presentation for City Hall, or I don't know, park.
That's actually one of the reasons I wanted to get it down, is that if we've got it recorded so that anyone can watch it, so that they can show it and come up with their own ideas, you know, because I think it's just this idea of putting some stuff out there and then people running with it.
Yeah.
And
I can think of a lot of people I'm going to share this with.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And we live in a fantastic neighborhood. And so it's lovely to see all these projects. Monique says, that was a wonderful, thank you. I love the idea of bringing bags or containers to seniors. I think of those who are housebound with disabilities too. There are a lot of folks who could benefit from container gardens. Well, again, I like that idea of, like, if you can't take the person to the garden, take the garden to the person. Even my mom, who's in Okotoks right now, she loves her balcony, and just growing tomatoes on her balcony means the world to her, or having a pot of flowers means the world to her. And so, yeah, and to have this idea of this garden buddy who's helping them and bringing them like the stuff, like the soil and the pots and the plants, and actually bringing the garden to the senior or to the person who's at home that can't get out. I think especially now, it could be really important. And we could do that with art materials as well, you know? I love the idea of I give you the sunflowers, you give me and you make the ink and give some to me.
Well, get ready.
Okay. So yeah, we can.
Lori.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I've just got a question for Catherine and Jenn, because they were part of your artist collective.
Yes.
You know, I'm always curious what artists learn about themselves and about their practices in the projects that we commission from the public art program, from this program specifically. I know that there were probably 101 things that you didn't get to do because of COVID this year, but were there any, you know, unexpected outcomes or things that you learned about yourself or your practice through the Victory Gardens for Diversity project?
Go ahead, Catherine.
I'd have to think about it.
How about you, Jenn?
Well, I learned that I have a lot more to learn. But I also learned, you know, I was really lucky to work with Lori and everyone else, like really incredible team of people, and now I feel like somewhat of a connection to that community. Like, these were women that I didn't know. I didn't know anything about their practice, nothing. So that was super valuable for me. And art-wise, yeah, just gonna keep on doing this and working through, working with plants and natural materials and yeah, see where it takes me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think I just wanted to say also that it's been really great for me to spend time with my collaborators on a very one-to-one level, and having that bit of time to work in the garden and get to know them and to spend time with them, because, you know, I actually have felt really isolated myself. And so I really appreciate that time that we had together. It's just been, it's helped me to get through this. It really has. And so, yeah, I think that building community, building an artist community is really important, because we can get quite isolated. And even though we live in the same neighborhood and we're like literally just minutes away from each other, it's a matter of like getting out there and having that discipline to be able to build community. It's been a really important thing for me, and I really appreciate it. And I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity to hang out with you. And I'm hoping that this will also create more collaboration in the future. So what was happened with this project is things were very slow and very quiet, but I think there's going to be some beautiful things that come out even after the project as a result of our collaboration. So maybe we're just getting started, darling. Watch the back alleys to come, because there might be some installations coming. Yeah. Maybe a revolution, who knows? Awesome. Anyone else have any questions? No. Well, I think we've had it. I think we're good. I really appreciate people showing up and hearing my ideas and contributing. And if you ever want to contact me, ask me any questions, my email is bespeaker@gmail.com. And I'll put this up on the interwebs, so that if you think of some kind of person that might benefit from this talk and might have their own ideas to share with us, that would be awesome. So sweet dreams, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy Sunday.
Yep.